Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. This one's actually inspired by someone who left a comment on one of my older TryHackMe walkthroughs who's having some problems, and I reached out to him on Discord and helped him out. Come to find out he was using the attack box. Now I understand that a lot of people do use the attack box for both TryHackMe and Hack the Box. It's a great resource, you can fire it up for free, you don't have to worry about doing anything on your local machine or having some weird boot system like I do. After going back and forth, I decided that, you know what, let's make a video about it. So that's what we're doing today. I want to show you how to set up VirtualBox, which is my preferred layer 2 emulator, and get Kali set up on it. I'm going to show you the install process for both Linux and Windows. Sorry if you're on Mac, I don't have a Mac image anywhere that I can do that with, but it's pretty straightforward. So here we are at the VirtualBox website, and of course I'll leave links to everything down below. And when you load this up, you simply all you have to do is click on download, and then here you have your options for host. Now if you're on Windows, of course you just pick first one there. Mac, it depends on which silicone you have, you're an Apple or Intel. Linux, click on it, and you have these different options. Now, I'm currently running on Ubuntu 24.04, and this will give you a deb file. However, you can actually just install VirtualBox from the repos by using the sudo app install VirtualBox. And then when you enter it, it's going to install it along with the Qt. The Qt is actually the GUI interface for it. And it does give you a suggestion about installing the guest add-ons ISO. You can install it if you want to, but on my Linux, I've never really had a need for it, so I usually just skip it. So just tell it yes here, and it will install. All right, and we're done. And that's all there is to it. Now let's hop over to Windows so I can show you how to do it there. Alright, so here we are on my Windows. Let's get this set up and I'll show you how to go through. So here you can see on the drive, we got the virtualbox.exe file that we downloaded. We'll just double click it. You'll have a little pop-up I just did. We have to click yes so it can continue. And pretty much just your kind of standard Windows install. Here, normally I would just uncheck this one for the quick launch bar because I don't like stuff down there too much. The rest of them you can leave checked. Alright, so the install is done and we'll just leave that box tick, hit finish, and there we go. We're now in. As you see, it does detect the virtual machine that I had saved in my profile over here. Setting up a machine is pretty much the same on any OS, so we'll hop back over to Linux and I'll show you how to set up Kali. Alrighty, we're back. Over onto my Linux side here. We're at the Kali website, kali.org. Again, link will be down in the description. And all we'll need to do is click on download here, and you have several options, including if you're using Windows and you've got the WSL Windows Subsystem for Linux installed, you can actually install Kali through that. Now since we're doing a virtual machine, you may think we want to go with this one, and I've tried using it a few times. It works, but I have better luck with doing things when I'm running tools and stuff if I just use the installer image. So you have to do here is just click this, and it'll come down asking, do you want the 64 image? Intel basically, or do you want Apple Silicone image? You got a couple of different options down here. I usually just use the standard installer. It's 4 gigs. With my internet connection, it only takes a couple of minutes to download. If you want to grab everything and not have to worry about pulling a bunch of updates, you can click this, torrent it down, and it's a 12 gig file, so it's pretty massive. So all you'd have to do here, if you want to follow along with me, is with the installer, click this little download link. I've already got it downloaded, and that'll get you set up. So I'm not going to do that again. So let's go fire up VirtualBox and get Kali installed. Okay, here we go. So as you can see, I've got no images set up at all, and this is a brand new install. And the first thing we're going to do is click on New. That gives us our pop-up here, and we can provide a name for the box. I'm just going to call this Kali CTF. That's what I'll end up using it for mostly. And then here, folder is where it's going to store the images. Now I have a folder on one of my other hard drives that I have specifically for this. So I'm going to point it toward that. And then it wants us to select an ISO image. And then wherever you downloaded the image, I'll put it on my shared drive here. You want to go and find it and highlight the kalilinux.iso file that you downloaded. And at the time of this recording, it's the 2024.4 edition. Now if you're curious about the expert mode, if this is your first time messing with a hypervisor, especially VirtualBox, don't go into it. Okay, so we'll just hit next. Now here is one of the most crucial parts for it. If you're only going to be running one virtual machine at a time, allocate a decent amount of resources to it, especially if you're going to be using it for your CTF hacking box. You'll need the resources. So on this machine, I've got 32 gigs available, so I'm just going to slide this up to 16. And then on the CPU, I've got a 12 core, 24 thread processor, so I can actually go all the way up to 12 cores with this. And that's what I want to allocate to because I want to have plenty of resources to handle things. So here on the virtual hard disk, normally this first one's going to be what you want to use, unless you're restoring from backups and pulling from old images, and you can use second option. So for this one, it defaults down to 25 gigs. I always set these at 100 gigs, and you can do pre-allocate full size. I usually don't do that. So what's neat about virtualization is it can have the setting for 100 gigs, but the actual hard drive file will actually be much smaller at first, and it's only as you add things into the system, as you add programs and you make files, that it will actually grow. So it doesn't take up 100 gigs right off the bat, and that's how I usually like to do it. And here, your summary, just some basic information showing what you set. If everything looks good, just hit finish, and now we got it set up. Now before we boot it, go into settings. There's a couple other things we want to check. So underneath system over here, if you look, you see it's got floppy, optical, hard disk. We don't need floppy, we don't need optical. And then down underneath display, you see we got video memory, and it's only 20 megabytes where the system can give it 128. So I'll just usually go ahead and max that out. Monitor count, I do have a dual monitor setup, but I'm only going to allow this to have access to one. Now underneath storage, you'll see a controller IDE. There's our Linux ISO. Now this will be important because after we get Linux installed, we'll come back here and I'll show you how to get rid of that. Audio is usually enabled by default. It's not that big of a thing with Kali, but I usually just leave it just in case. Now here on networking, this is where you'll see people usually differ between NAT and bridged adapter. Honestly, both work. Both have their different use cases. Where this is really going to matter is if you're running multiple virtual machines and you want to have them on their own software network separate from yours. That's when it will really matter. But I normally just throw this into bridged adapter, and that EMP is my hard line, the WP is my wireless, so I'll just leave it on my hard line there. Serial ports, I always leave those disabled because there's not really much of a use for them anymore. USB, I do leave this enabled because one, I've had issues in the past where I disable this and all of a sudden the mouse doesn't work in the machine. And two, sometimes I will use a USB drive to hook into to transfer files between machines. Share folders, this is nice, this is optional. I've used it before where I've had a folder on one of my hard drives and I set it up as a share so the virtual OS can have access to it. And it's been nice to have whenever I'm moving files back and forth. Again, personal preference for this, I'm not going to set any up. Let's start this up. So this one was my bad. For first time install, yes, we need the optical and we need to put it in front of the hard drive. So that was my error, my bad. Apologize for that. So let's go try that again. There we go. Now when you first start this, as you can see, the screen is going to be small. That just happens. You have to get through the install and get everything set up first before you can actually make it a larger screen. Okay, then from here, pretty much your basic Linux install, so I'll just speed through this. We got language, location, keyboard layout, getting a network set up. So here where we start setting up some things for the machine. Please enter a host name for the system, Kali, that's fine, we'll leave it at that. Domain, I don't have any of that structure on my local network, so I'm not going to worry about it. Full name for the new user. Of course, I'll put in Gandorf. Username for new account, leave the same. And now password. You continue, configure the clock, Eastern time. Now it's going through and looking for the disk, and so we can figure out what partition set up. So if you're not really familiar with Linux partitioning and know a few of the tricks that you can do to make things a little bit better and stable in case you incur crashes or have to reinstall the main OS part, just stick with the guided, use entire disk. And the LVM and encrypted LVM, they're nice. I wouldn't really worry about them too much unless you really are in a situation where this is a PC that multiple people use, or you're on a laptop. Like I've got a laptop that I've got Kali installed bare bones on it, and I do have that drive encrypted because I don't want someone getting in there, accidentally getting in and messing around with things that they don't know what they're doing with. But for this, I'm just going to use the entire disk and leave it unencrypted because I'm the only one that uses my PC. Alright, and as you can see, it has detected that 100 gig VirtualBox hard drive that we set up. Now here's one of the neat things you can do. You can actually make a separate partition from home that's separate from the OS partition, so that way if something happens with the OS, you can just reinstall it and still have your own partition, all your files over there. You can even go a step further and separate out more to their own partitions, which is not a bad idea. Usually when it comes to these VMs, I'm not too worried about it. I make snapshots, which I will show you how to do. So I'll just leave that first option there and hit continue. And then this screen just shows you basically what it's going to do. It's going to set our primary 1 gig, and that's what that / Linux means. That's your root partition. And then we're going to have a 5 gig swap, and that's used with your RAM for file access and stuff like that. And the 5 gig swap file's more than enough. I'd actually normally would. So this is just basically asking, do you want to write these partitions to the disk? So make sure you swap this to yes. Click continue. And now it's installing this base system. And when this part's done, I'll be back. Alright, so the base system got done, and now we're at the options section. So we want to select the desktop environment. As you can see, your options are XFCE, GNOME, and KDE. XFCE's Kali's default is the one that I prefer. It's one I got set up on my Xubuntu here, because Xubuntu comes with it. Collection of tools, selecting this has no effect, but what it does, top 10 and the default. Make sure you have these selected so you have the most amount of tools already installed and set up and ready to go. Click continue. Now we just wait for that to install. Be back. Alrighty, so here we are. It's arguably one of the most important things with installing Linux, your grub options. Now for this one, it is the only OS on the system. I'm not going to install another one on the hard drive, and it's asking about where to install the grub bootloader to your primary drive. And you usually always want to do this, and if you're in a setup where you're installing multiple partitions, multiple Linuxes, you can usually tell the newer ones just to override your previous grub install. And if you really want to dig into the weeds, you can actually tell it to skip it and then go into your current grub and actually add the other partitions in, which actually isn't that hard to do. You just gotta make sure you got all your notes ready to go, you got your drive paths correct and everything, so you don't enter in something incorrectly and cause boot failures or a boot loop. But here we'll be fine with just selecting yes, hit continue. Okay, then on the screen you want to select your VirtualBox hard drive here. For me, that's going to be /dev/SDA. Maybe the same or a different drive for you. Hit continue. And this will install a grub bootloader. And just getting some things finished here, and I'll be back when it's done. Okay, and if you see this screen, we managed to get through the entire process, and we are good to boot into the OS for the first time. So just hit continue here, and it'll clean up, and then it will reboot. Okay, here we are rebooted. We just select the Kali Linux, and they just went away, but it had some of those errors and stuff about graphics and stuff. If you get those, don't panic, give it a minute, and it should be able to correct and get everything set up. And you should see our little Kali dragon here, and it's booting. And there we go. We are at our login prompt. So let's go ahead and log in. And of course, it always takes a minute for everything to come up and for the desktop environment to get set and everything, these virtual machines. All right, and there we go. Kali is installed. It is set up and ready to go. Now, of course, as always, anytime you install Linux OS, whenever you get it installed for the first time, always go in and run your sudo app update and sudo app upgrade to make sure all your packages are updated. As you can see here, it's got 940 packages. So I'm going to hold off on doing that so I can show you a couple other things, some cleanup we can do after the install. Okay, so I got the system shut down, and first thing I want to do is go into settings here, go into storage. Now, thankfully in these newer versions, it'll actually take the ISO out after you're done installing. In the past, it didn't do that, and that was always kind of a pain. But I'll come into your system, and I have no need for the optical drive now, so now I can disable it here, so it'll just boot straight to the hard drive. Now, earlier I mentioned about taking snapshots, and I'll show you how to do that real quick. So if you click on the little 3 buttons here, you get details, snapshots, and all this other stuff. So you click on snapshots, you see it just shows current state here. You can click on take up here in the corner, and it'll take a snapshot of its current image. Of course, you can give it a name, call this fresh install, and there you go. Snapshot made. Simple as that. Now, usually with your CTF boxes, the way I typically do it is if I'm competing in a CTF, I'll take a snapshot before I start, and usually at the end of the day. Other than that, I usually will take a snapshot maybe once a week, just so I have a more recent point to go back to if I need to. Alright. And with that, you now have Kali set up in VirtualBox, and you are good to go, and there's not really a need to use the attack boxes anymore. They are still a valid option. You can use them from time to time, but I would highly recommend setting this up if you're able to, if you have the resources to dedicate to it. It's a good experience, and it gets you an environment that you have more control over and you can do more things with. With that, I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please subscribe and leave a like. Leave a comment as well. I'd really appreciate it. If you have any other questions about setting up something for CTFs or anything about TryHackMe or Hack the Box, feel free to ask. If there's anything I can do to help, I'll be more than glad to. See you next time.